I'd like to welcome everybody to our second webinar of the Crisis Management Series. Yesterday, we talked about how to build your crisis communication plan, and today we're going to talk about remote work best practices. For those of you that weren't on yesterday, we'll give a quick little overview of who Brandon and I are, what our companies are, what the Conflux is, and why we're doing this. So Brandon and I are partners in goBRANDgo. It's a marketing company that works with $25 to $250 million manufacturing companies that their owners are in their 50s and 60s, looking to make some successful leadership transition in the next decade or so. They've got a couple grandkids, they've got the lake house, they've got their motorcycle, and we help them achieve their growth goals along with that next generation of leader, whether that be family or professional. A lot of what we are seeing in the manufacturing space is that the changes that are happening in the industry are going to, those changes, there's going to be more changes in the next 5 years than there's been in the last 50. There's going to be a lot of companies that, and I think this crisis is showing that the speed of innovation and the ability to innovate your business model and the ability to adapt your go-to-market strategy is really, really important. And those are the things that we're seeing that are vitally important for these companies to work on as they go forward. And what we've seen with our clients is when we get them in the same room together, it's just dynamic. And so what the Conflux is a co-learning space that's curating content and connections to get these manufacturers together in the same space, in the same place, so they can learn and grow from each other and help share experiences, because oftentimes what happens is changes that go through one industry, in specific manufacturing industry, roll down a little bit later down into other industries. And so that's what the Conflux is all about. We're going to be opening this fall with a physical space here in St. Louis in a historic school building. But in the meantime, we felt this was a great opportunity to use what skill sets, and the network that we have to put these tips out here on how best to get through this and manage this crisis that's going on right now. So today, remote work best practices. And as I mentioned yesterday, there's probably nobody on this planet that's better suited to handle this type of workshop in this type of environment than my good friend and partner here, Brandon Dempsey. So before Brandon and I came together on goBRANDgo, Brandon, his first company out of college was a company called Sweet Commute. And this company specifically focused on remote work consulting for large corporations and medium-sized companies. And this was 10, 12 years ago. So much, much earlier than now, where it's much more commonplace. So he's got the fundamentals and the basics of what it takes to not only manage a remote team, but to make sure that the performance stays either at the same high level and sometimes even higher. So we're excited to share some best practices with you today and hope that you're able to implement this with your team and keep that level of productivity high as the quarantine continues. So Brandon, take it away.
Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, I'm stoked. This is a topic that literally when I graduated college, I thought this concept of remote work and work from home, I interviewed in St. Louis 187 HR professionals. And what kept coming back was, we know we've got the technology in place. Even when I graduated college, they've got the technology in place. But what we don't know is how to manage people we can't see. And we've got a lot of people who are really uncomfortable transitioning to work from home. And that's what sparked the idea around, all right, maybe there's an opportunity here to create a company that just trains companies on how to help employees work from home. We ended up working with companies from the East Coast, West Coast, or from Qualcomm to Google and Wolters Kluwer, and then here locally with Enterprise Rent-A-Car and MasterCard Worldwide, and some other just really, really, really fantastic companies. So I have a huge passion for work from home. And obviously I'm in my basement right now, as you can all see. So there is real world, and I do have dogs around me. Derek's, and you're in home office. I lost my home office 4 months ago to a new baby girl. So Aubrey took my home office. So I got relegated down to the basement. So with that, let's jump in. If you could go real quick, open another tab on your computer, go to pollev.com/bdempsey117. We did this yesterday. It actually worked really well. I didn't have a technology snafu. So again, pollev.com/bdempsey117. If you're able to, you don't have to, but if you're able to on your computer, just pull this up, or you can do it on your phone as well. And then we're curious, just how would you rate right now the state of your business currently? So what do you think the state of your business is currently? Again, pollev/bdempsey117, and just curious, how do you put it? I can tell you yesterday we had for those of you that were on here, most people were in the orange, yellow, or light to green. We did actually have a couple people in the very dark green. But I just think it's interesting to see kind of how people are taking this as far as from a state of business. It's been a big transition. I know even though we have, we allow all of our employees to work from home currently, it's already been a big transition to have everybody work from home. We had one of our team members this morning just saying, I just miss the energy of being around people. And it's become a real struggle. So we get that the struggle is real. I'll give it another second or two for these to come in. It looks like most of them are falling. I'm glad to see nobody in the red or the orange. That's really good. All right, so I'm going to hit you with the next one. Keep up that screen, and you should see it refresh to where do you think you'll be 6 months from now? So how do you think your business will be 6 months from now? And the reason we're asking these questions is that so I started Sweet Commute as a part of trying to get the word out of work from home. I also worked with a few other people to launch a nonprofit called pandemicprep.org. And pandemicprep.org was really a nonprofit to help raise awareness around, at the time, preparing for H1N1, which was the bird flu. Then several years after that, we had swine flu hit, SARS, and then of course now coronavirus, COVID-19. But that whole nonprofit around pandemicprep.org always looked at, okay, you got an incident, a pandemic, and you're going to have about a 6-month window. And what's really interesting is that when we were planning back then, if you look at China now and you look at Japan now, right? China hasn't reported any net new cases. Japan is coming back online. It was like a 6-month interruption. And so I think it's good to think about this as, okay, hey, we're going to have about a 6-month potential interruption. And what I'm glad to see is the amount of people that are marking light green and dark green and shifting over 6 months. Those of you in the orange, seriously, you must obviously be in a business that is getting drastically impacted now. And it's going to be about how fast can we ramp up. So let's talk about some of the work from home tactics now. So we're going to be looking at today is everything from mindset to productivity fears, all the way down into kind of reinventing your routines, and then how to manage remotely. The information we've got today is a combination of information the content that was literally built 15 years ago, which is scary for me to say that. And then we've updated and built for the webinar today, and looking at our employees, and then also talking with current clients as well. So the first thing I think you got to think about is, for the mindset of the team that you're working with, is that it's a different mindset now. And when we think about this from a fear and uncertainty, there's a lot of people not knowing what's going on. And it's going to be hard working from home. Is that I've got 2 dogs here. My wife actually just took our 2 daughters out to go. I think they're going to like Smoothie King for like a drive-through to just get a smoothie because they can't go in any place. But we're looking at having to do distance learning. And I know Derek and I were talking earlier about it's going to be really interesting when you've got to be an employee, you've got to be a parent, and you've got to be a teacher all at the same time, which I think leads to this concept of how am I going to do this? And a big part of that's going to be, okay, what's the rhythm going to be for me, my family, and my employer? So I think we're going to talk a little bit more about establishing your routine, but this mindset of we've had this routine, right? And I was talking with one of our other team members this morning, and that he said he missed the drive into work because it was time where he used to listen to Audible. And I remember in our training from a long time ago, I used to tell people, hey, that anywhere 30-minute commute that you have to work, it's allowing you to get your mindset ready to jump into work. Whereas now you walk straight from, for me, I walk from a bedroom down a flight of stairs and I'm in my office and I can see upstairs and see life and family going on at the same time. And so it's this different feeling of suddenly I'm at home, but I'm at work. And we've got to find a rhythm or a system to help make that shift of, all right, dad's leaving and dad's going to work now. Dad's not just home, even though my toddler wants to keep asking me, Daddy, can we play now? So I think that from a mindset standpoint, we've got to keep in mind that everybody right now is going to be struggling with this, and being really understanding with people that we're all working through this. Next is I think we've got to make sure that we're, go ahead, Derek.
I was saying what's important to be really empathetic here, and we're going to talk later about empathetic expectations, but you have to understand right now as leaders, we're controlling the narrative, we're controlling the messaging, we're controlling, what their lives are going to be like. They're on the receiving end on that. And that I know as a type A control freak myself, when you feel out of control, there's that sense of fear and expectation and that uncertainty. So just be really empathetic and be really understanding that your employees are thinking about things that you probably don't even know and are afraid about things that they don't even know. And so they want to work well for you. They want to be productive for you. And so the biggest thing is that this is where, once again, our job as leaders is to step up and have clear, calm, concise messaging and be able to get out in front of these fears and uncertainties and express them and talk about them to make sure that they know that they feel heard and they know that they feel understood. So once again, this is a really important time for us as leaders to control that narrative and control that messaging.
Thanks, Derek. And another, I think I was talking earlier this week with one of my friends who owns a professional services firm, and he was saying, you know, we are not sending our people to work from home this week. We haven't gone there because I just don't think that people are as productive at home, and I'm not sure that they're going to be as productive at home. So we're going to keep them here kind of as long as we can because people are just more productive here. And I remember getting that objection to a lot of people before when we did the work from home consulting. And really what it all resounded around or revolved around was this concept of trust. And that trust, in my mind, has to be given, but it also has to be earned at the same time. So in a work from home setting, I think we're going to be having to give the trust to other people that, hey, I trust you're going to do your job. I trust you're going to ask me for help. But at the same time, we've got to close the loop and make sure that, okay, that trust is getting earned. And I've got to still show up and I've still got to be ready to be earning that trust. All right, next, click here. So the productivity fears, I love that question because the statistics have actually gone up from a productivity standpoint. So these are stats that we pulled recent stats. These are all from reports anywhere from 2019, actually one of these reports was from 2017. So this data is anywhere from 3 to 2 years old. But 86% of responders feel more productive, 76% of employees feel it's less distracting, and 67%, so 2/3 of managers saw an overall increase in productivity among their staff. So these are stats. The 67% of managers was actually done off a study done by Stanford of 16,000 people working from home. And they found that managers felt like, hey, there was an increase in productivity for my staff of working from home. And we find this time and time again. The stats used to be 45% productivity increase, or managers would say 45%. And so now it's cool to see the data is even higher than that. But this comes from people being able to have less distractions and be able to be more focused. Now, if you're used and accustomed to an office setting, I would say that we're in a period of time where we're going to be focused much more on work from home during this kind of quarantine or shelter in place. If you're under that, or if you're in St. Louis, then it's just being advised right now to work from home, and it will lift. But there are opportunities here to become productive and really focus on, okay, how do we stay productive and what can we do? So I won't go too much into all of these tools, but there are a lot of different tools out there. Under the chat side, you've got the Apple products of FaceTime, and then you've got Facebook's WhatsApp Messenger and Slack and Google Hangouts. So these can be good, easy tools for quick chatting. I find internationally, if you're dealing with teams internationally, WhatsApp for me seems to have been a really strong medium for keeping the chat going because so many international people are on WhatsApp outside the US. It's a lot bigger outside the US than inside the US. And then our team is using Slack internally now, and we're constantly using Slack to stay up to date. From a meeting standpoint, the 3 leading products out there, I think right now are kind of GoToMeeting, Zoom, and Skype. Skype is native into the Microsoft environment. Obviously, we're using Zoom Webinar now, and then I was on a GoToMeeting just earlier this week. So I think from a meeting software, there's plenty of other great meeting softwares out there as well. These seem to be operating pretty well, so I want to put these out there. And then lastly, this is document management. It's going to become a big deal while you're working from home, and collaboration on that document management. So Microsoft's got a great product, Microsoft Teams, from a chat and communication standpoint, but then also their Microsoft Suite and Office 365 of how it's been expanded out. Google's answer to that is Google Drive or G Suite. So you've got Docs, just basically take everything from Microsoft of Word and PowerPoint and Excel and sort of switch over to Google. Our company uses Google Suite. We find that the ability to jump in and have 5 or 6 people. I mean, for this presentation, we've had 6 people editing this presentation at one time and this is a Google Slides presentation. I believe now that, my understanding now that Microsoft has that ability in PowerPoint and Word under the Office 365 product. But the point is going to be get your team into some sort of sharing document system so that you can be collaborating on stuff together in real time, as opposed to emailing versions back and forth. Because working from home, what we want to do is try to, normally we get a lot of our questions answered when we're in the office because we just ask, hey, Derek, or hey, Jamie, or hey, Nicole, and we get answers really quick because we're in the office together. Whereas now we're in a virtual setting, which means we've got to be able to create that dialogue without constantly having to set up a Zoom call or send a new Slack message. And we just focus on the work in that document as we're working through it. So I highly encourage you to use one of these. Most likely you're already on one of these platforms. Just turn on that collaboration piece. So from a communication standpoint, Derek, you want to jump into here because I know you're going to take this session.
Yeah. So and this is where team communication really makes a difference of in-person versus virtual. And sometimes you can kind of establish what you were doing in person and make it done virtually. But oftentimes, most of us are having to kind of come up with different communication rhythms. So each day, we start our team off at 8:30 a.m. every morning, and each individual is reporting, what did you accomplish yesterday? What is your focus for today? And where are you stuck? And who do you need help from? So this is where we utilize, those technologies that Brandon just mentioned. So and we have a Slack channel that's our Go Huddle. And so everyone puts those pieces of information into our Slack channel, and then our Zoom call is when we actually talk about where people are stuck and who can help. And so it's really important to create that rhythm of communication to make sure that people don't hit roadblocks. Because as Brandon mentioned, people are used to being able to just kind of turn around and ask for help, or that interpersonal dynamic that really keeps people and keeps things moving. And that's what makes offices really productive. And that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's really important to build in those communication rhythms to help accomplish that.
And then next, from a weekly standpoint, we need to be looking at celebrating the wins. So people are going to feel isolated. They're going to feel like they're not, they feel isolated because we're not around. We're not able to get the pat on the back as quickly. So I think it's really important that you take time each week from the previous week to say, okay, we're starting off this week. What's all the good stuff that happened? And now is probably more of an important time than ever to say, okay, how are we going to start off our week and all the good stuff that happened last week? Then from there, looking at, okay, how do we assess and report on that team performance in our team huddle? So in a remote setting, I encourage you to be setting expectations with teams in somewhat of a video chat or something where you're getting group settings, because then the group can hold each other accountable versus a manager holding someone accountable. And we find that in virtual work, the more you can get people making accountabilities and making commitments publicly, the better off you're going to be from an accountability standpoint, because now I'm beholden to a whole bunch of people. I made a commitment publicly to a whole bunch of people, as opposed to just making a commitment to my boss.
And this is so important right now, where everybody's on the same page, not just your team, your company, but everybody across the world right now. And so these are things that you can embrace that adversity that everyone's facing, and use that as leverage within your team to motivate and align them. I'm saying, once again, how can we be of service to others? How can we celebrate the wins that are happening, and making sure that accountability on moving that work forward is not just task management, but it's also, what are the things that we're doing well in the world? How are we being successful? How are we making an impact? In times like this, the hard and fast, the cold, the black and the white, that a lot of people typically focus on in business from a financial perspective, is taking a little bit of a back seat, and there's a lot more humanistic approach and the soft approach in those emotions. So make sure that all the productivity and accountability is not just on KPIs and productivity metrics, but also making sure that you're humanizing and having some heart involved in that.
Thank you, Derek. This next section is my passion. All right, so here we go. All right, great virtual meetings. And I got to move. I've got a video up, so pardon my mouse movement there. I'll move the video down here. All right. So These are tips on how to hold great virtual meetings. And I want you all to pay really close attention to this. So if you're doing email right now, just look to the slide really quick at least. All right. So first, video whenever possible, and turn the dang video on. There's so many people that jump into a virtual meeting and they keep their video off because like, oh, I haven't done my hair today. I don't know what I'm wearing. Or if you're going to like be bold, and part of the turning the video on is, yes, you should have showered today. You should have gotten dressed. Like, and still look somewhat decent, right? Somewhat professional. But use that video because video is going to help hold accountability. It's going to help set routines, and it's going to help with the engagement and feedback with people. Next, get on their meetings early. So whenever we book a meeting, if I book it for an hour, I always hop on early. At least 5 minutes early, because we don't have the interaction now, the idle chit chat in the office like we're used to having. And so in a virtual setting, people still need that chit chat, that water cooler talk, that what's going on, how are your kids doing, how are you surviving this, like that talk that's not just about work. So get to the meeting 5 minutes early. If you're the host, start at 5 minutes early, and be ready. Just have some chit chat and then start on time. You'll notice today we started this webinar on the dot, and that's how we're running all our meetings. And then if it's a 30-minute meeting, only run it for 25 minutes. Or if it's a 60-minute meeting, only run it for 50. Reason is, when do all of the action items get assigned? At the end of the meeting, right? It's always in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting that all the action items get assigned. What do people start thinking about at the end of the meeting? The action items or the next meeting? And the fact is that all of us, myself included, if we've got meetings back to back, we're already thinking about our next meeting, which means when all the action items and all the really important stuff from the meeting we just had is getting assigned, our brains are tuned out. So if you're facilitating that meeting, end that meeting at 25 minutes, but book it for 30, so you give people that 5 minutes time to prepare for their next meeting, or that 10 minutes time to prepare for their next meeting. When you start the virtual meeting, you need to define what success looks like, all right? So the purpose of this call is XYZ. We're going to go through this, and we're going to be done by this point in time, all right? So define what that success looks like. And then next, stop saying who just joined. So if you're on conference calls and doing conference calls and you're not in a video setting, it's just everyone dialing into a conference call line, stop saying who just joined. Roll through the meeting. Because the fact is that most people, and I'm sure some of you, I can't see your faces now, but if you know that a conference call, people are going to hop on, you know what, I really don't have to hop on to like 1 or 2 minutes into the meeting, because the first 1 or 2 minutes are just them waiting for everyone to get there. And then they just start asking who just joined. And then if we go into the meeting and the meeting starts and someone joins, say, who just joined? Oh, it's Fred. Oh, okay. Well, now let's start all the meeting back over. And we're 7 minutes in, but let's start all the way back over and try and get everybody caught up. So we've now wasted the first 10 minutes of a meeting a lot of times. And some of you are smiling and paying attention, some of you are doing email, but we've now wasted the first 10 minutes of that just asking and trying to get things ready. So if you start on time and start running your meeting on time, and people hop on and realize, oh crap. I mean, it'd be like walking into a meeting. And could you imagine walking into a meeting and seeing everyone around a table, and you walk in late? What does everyone do? They turn and they look at you, and you feel awkward, right? But for some reason in a conference call, it's okay to hop on late because it's not that big of a deal. So we've got to start putting some of that social pressure, if you will, to having people show up on time for our meetings. And one of the ways we do that is by not asking who just joined, all right? Also, stop asking blanket questions to the group. What does anybody think about this? Anybody have any challenge? Anybody have any questions? Because what happens? As soon as you say, does anyone have any questions? Silence, and then everyone starts talking all at once, right? So you've got to be using pointed questions. And then part of pointed questions is asking specific questions and putting people's names first. Because when we hear our name, if I say Derek, XYZ, or I say Ryan, XYZ, and if I were to use your name, whoever's on this webinar, I said your name first, you immediately pay attention and you hear and you start listening and tuning in, okay? So if I say your name first and then I ask my question, you're automatically tuned in and ready to respond. If we're talking and there's a bunch of people talking or we're going through a discussion and I say a question and I say, so what'd you think about that, Ryan? What'd you think about that, Jim? What do most people say? Could you repeat the question? Right? Because they weren't tuned in. They had other things in their head they're thinking about that they're going through, right? So put their name first and then ask the question. And then lastly, in conference calls, whether it's video chat or if it's just everyone dialing into a conference bridge over the phone, you're going to have introverts. And these introverts aren't going to talk over people. They're not going to shout. And so whoever is facilitating the meeting, you need to be calling on those introverts with their names specifically to make sure you're pulling them into the meeting. All right. Because the reason people feel like they jump into conference calls and they're not needed and they don't pay attention is because no one ever says their name or no one asks them to participate. So be a good meeting facilitator and specifically call on those introverts so that you're getting that engagement in your calls.
I think
I love that
the key
section.
thing here is that these aren't just tips for great virtual meetings. These are tips for great meetings. The thing is during in-person meetings, oftentimes we can overcome a lot of these best practices by not doing them, because you can just overcome them with sheer personality, or you can overcome them with the interpersonal dynamics. The importance with virtual meetings is you don't have that luxury. You don't have the ability to read body language or to kind of see what's going on with people behind the door. And so what's vitally important is that you become a master facilitator of meetings, and it starts with these great tips. And there's plenty more, and there's plenty more best practices, but these are the things that really make such a big difference in running not just a virtual meeting, but any great meeting. And in order to run even an adequately good virtual meeting, you have to be a master of these tips.
All right. This is verbalizing nonverbals is going to be a big piece of interacting virtually. So there are all these stats in communication that anywhere from 60% to as much as 90%, and one stat even said 92% of communication is done nonverbally. And only 8% or 15% or whatever the latest statistics are is actually what is said or what is written. So when you're working in a virtual setting, we need to verbalize these nonverbals. So I tell people a lot of times, use your sportscaster voice, right? So if you're in a conference call and you're not in a video section, it's okay. I think people should be like, oh, my jaw just dropped when you said that, right? Like you're putting some emotion into it and you're calling the play. This is big on, you may have some people who are still in an office or are still working together, and the people on the conference line need to know what's happening. So a lot of times when we are in that situation, I say, hey, so-and-so just left the room, or so-and-so just came in and they're confused about this. So-and-so has Jamie, you have a puzzled look on your face. What's with the puzzled look on your face, right? So think about how a sportscaster calls out the play and calls out what's happening on the field, if you will, in football or whatever sport you're watching. And that's the kind of mentality we want to have, how to help people orient what's happening in the room, or orient how you're feeling, or orient what's happening on the call. Next, we need to humanize the approach. So as much as we can, use emoticons and email and writing. And I think it's totally okay to use text style and color, bold and underline, and sending Google images or GIFs, and because that's how humans interact with one another, right? Like we're not all stuffy. And I keep people all the time to say, well, Brandon, what's professional? And we're a business to business setting. Well, the fact is that we're still people to people, right? And we're selling, if we're working together, there is no such thing as a business to business. Two businesses don't decide to work together. It's the humans inside that business that decide that they want to do business together, or that they're going to collaborate together, which means the more that we can humanize that interaction, the better the better interaction we're going to have. Next, please, more bullet points, less paragraphs. I have yet to find anybody who really likes reading emails that are this long and should be short novels. Like people, in my experience, just really hate reading a novel. And most of the time, the most important part of that email is generally buried at the bottom. And so I think it's important that we use bullet points as much as we can, and we put the important stuff of what we want to get done or accomplished more toward the top of that email, so that people can understand here's what's happening and here's what's actually need to be done. Another thing that actually I should have in here, but we don't have in here, is changing the subject lines of your emails. So when you're sending, because we're going to be sending a lot more emails over the next few weeks with so many people working from home, drop the forward, drop the or colon, and change the subject line of what you want, because you've all been on emails where that email chain goes through, and by the time you get it, and it's all these forwards and all these replies, the point of what the email was even talking about has completely changed and is a completely new subject. So I'd highly encourage you to constantly change the subject line with what it is you're trying to get across, or whatever the point is, or what you want people to pay attention to in that email. And then using the bullets and putting up on top what you want people to do. So next,
Brandon, if you go back real quick.
Yep.
what I want to hit on here is what's really important is the always humanizing the approach. So the beauty of technology is it's scalable and it's flexible and all those things. The challenge with it is it's cold and it lacks that human connection. And this is a lot of what is, once again, on us as leaders, is how can we look at every interaction, how can we look at every communication and try to make it just a little more human? How can we make it be a little bit more personal? You know, there's a lot of ways that you can do that and make it feel better. And so each time you're communicating with someone, think about, just stop, pause, and think, how can I make this just a little bit more human? And so, you know, this is where instead of sending an email, because as Brandon said, there's a lot more emails going around. So instead of sending an email, maybe do a phone call. Maybe instead of a phone call, do a video chat. Because each time that you can elevate the level of humanness to this interaction, to this communication, the effectiveness is going to go up as well. And when you've got your team feeling pretty disconnected right now because they're probably not working in the way that they normally are, they're not interacting with their teammates the way that they normally are. And so it's on us as leaders to make sure that we are building that human nature back into the technology, because it's not there inherently. So we have to be very intentional about building the humanness into our communications.
That's an awesome, Derek. What that has me thinking about right now is some of the discussions that we used to have with companies when they were transitioning to working from home, was about how they have one way of working when they're at work, and they have these status meetings, and they have, here's how the work actually gets done. And we know we have policies and procedures, but here's how the work actually gets done. And then we transition everyone to working from home, and it's suddenly totally different. And I think if we're going to transition to working from home, we need to take the structure of what worked really well in our office setting, if we're used to and accustomed to working in an office, and we just need to recreate that structure virtually. So that structure is everything from empathy to how we communicate with one another, to how we in the morning ask people how their days are going or how their weekends went and what happened. Like that informal structure, we just now have to create a little bit more formal structure in a virtual world, if you will, with video chats, with Slack, with emailing, with text messaging, with calling. We still need to recreate that structure. It's just going to be delivered in a different medium. So if you're a manager and you're used to talking to your employees about, hey, how did your weekend go? Or what happened last weekend, or this and that? Well, instead of it being ad hoc in the office when you see people, you're going to need to schedule time on your calendar to reach out and ask people those questions, right? If you're used to checking up with someone one time a week about how their week's going, or if there's anything they're stuck on, you're going to need to schedule that time and be diligent about scheduling that time with them so that it happens. So we need to take the informal process of how we got our work done in the office, and we just have to formalize it and schedule it and be conscious of it a little bit more when we're working from home, because we're not going to accidentally bump into one another in the office and say, oh yeah, where's that report? Or are you working on this? Like, it's just not going to happen. So we've got to formalize a little more. So the next is, you need to verify the meaning when you're communicating with people. So I'm going to let you read this and just think on how did you read this. So when we were building this presentation, I got a huge laugh because I put this slide in here, and I told you we had, I think, like 6 people collaborating on this slide. And as we were collaborating on this slide, people kept trying to fix this statement, because I typed this statement in here for verify meeting. And depending on how you read this statement, you may read this statement as proceed, no further approval needed. Or you might read this statement as proceed no further, approval needed. Now, normally if I'm doing this live, I'd be asking you, which way did you read it? And in my polling, literally it's almost always half the room read it as proceed, no further approval needed. Yeah, I'm good to go. And now, unless I'm in a sales meeting, then it's most all sales guys read this as proceed, no further approval needed. They're like, just go. And if I'm talking with more engineers, generally more engineers are like, no, it clearly says proceed no further, approval needed. And when I have a mixed group, I love how they just argue, because I only show that first statement and they just argue. No, here's what it says. No, here's what it says. Well, the fact is they're both right. And the only thing that changed was a comma. And in this virtual working remotely and working from home, we're going to get comments like the top of proceed no further, approval needed. And we need to verify, okay, what does that mean? And so this is not a class on, hey, make sure you're really good on your punctuation. but this is a class on working from home and making sure that you're understanding what is the right way to work and communicate with one another. And so verifying the communication that you're getting and also taking the time to reread what you're sending people now is really, really, really important, because you're not going to get that body language back and forth. And this is also where some of those emoticons and gifts come into play, because depending on it's amazing to me how, depending on what kind of day I'm having today, shockingly is how I read my email. So if I'm having a bad day, I somehow get a lot of negative email. But if I'm having a really good day, the emails I read are just a little bit more positive. And that's because there's no context. Remember that 90% or 80% or whatever the quotes are about communication is done through nonverbals, and only 8 or 10% or whatever is done, small amount is done through written word. When you get email, it's just the written word. And so we've got to be putting some of these other emotion in there. We've got to be putting punctuation in there. We need to be using bullet points and to communicate clearer, because we don't have the rest of the context to be able to communicate and send to people.
Once again, this is not just best practices for virtual meetings. This is best practices for communication. You know, as leaders, our job is to communicate clearly, to set our vision, and to make sure that people are understanding what we're trying to accomplish and set that tone and set that message. So in person, once again, we can overcome it just like in meetings, but in virtual environments, it's really difficult to assess out that context. So it's very important that we become much more clear communicators of our vision, much more clear communication around our goals. And these are best practices that on the other side of this, business will be different. What's really a great opportunity right now is for us to hone our skills as leaders, as meeting facilitators, as visionaries, as communicators, because this is where we can get a lot of practice time and a lot of repetitions in on how can we improve our process, how can we improve our approach. And then on the other side, when we get to bolster not only having these enhanced communication skills and leadership skills, but now having the benefit of a blended office and virtual environment, our companies are going to be in a lot better position to take on bigger challenges. So empathetic expectation. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and in our homes and in our workplaces, in our environments. And there's a lot of people right now who are kind of stressed to the max because dealing with uncertainty is such a big challenge. And so right now we need to have a little bit of empathy for our team and for our employees, once again, because they're probably more feeling like the change is happening to them, where we actually have a little bit of the ability to make the change happen. So although we still have to have high expectations of making sure that we're producing, making sure that our teams are still hitting their marks, but also have some understanding that, you know, the kids are probably home too. For those of you who were on the webinar yesterday, you saw my daughter walk through that door right there. And, you know, that's just kind of how it goes. You know, and what we've chosen to do at goBRANDgo is actually embrace it. And I've seen a lot of other companies doing this well. You know, the fastest way to get, I know for my kids, to get them to do something, to not do something you don't want them to do, is tell them you don't want them to do it. So if I'm having a call and I say, hey, be quiet, we're having a call, that is like a cue for them to start yelling and screaming and fighting and doing everything they can possibly do to interrupt what I've asked them not to do. So what we've done is in our meetings, we actually have the kids come on and we have them say hi. When I'll take my earbud out and put it in their ear, and we'll have them wave and talk. Embrace it. Have fun with it. You know, kids are a part of this dynamic. They're a part of our families. They're a part of our businesses. So take advantage of this time. You know, this is a temporary period, but instead of fighting it, instead of trying to push it away, embrace it. Let the kids be involved. Let your kids be involved in meetings, and if you know, and let them be a part of what's going on. You know that everybody's settling into a new normal. You know, the working from home is a huge adjustment. The time and balancing of how to be a parent, how to be an employee, how to be a teacher, all of these things are going to take a little bit of time to kind of figure out. And so there's going to be some times that I know a lot of companies are used to having very rigid, you clock in at 8 o'clock, you clock out at 5 o'clock. And that's really just an impossibility in this day and age right now. That is a framework that's going to create a lot of friction and a lot of challenges. So once again, as leaders, it's up to us to set those expectations, to try to figure out what that's going to look like. but understand that you're going to have to be empathetic and be flexible with what it looks like. And this comes back to trust has to be given, but also earned. It's kind of like one of those things where, there's behavioral economics studies out there that if you put a sign that says, limit only one, and you have something out to be taken, in the lunchroom, if you say only take one, what do people do when it's free? A lot of times they're filling their bag and they're taking more and more. But they did a study and they said, we trust you to only take one. When you build on that level of trust, when you give that trust, people want to live up to that. When you inherently communicate and clarify what that looks like, people will work to it and live up to it. As leaders, it's our job to set those expectations of what we are trusting them to do so that they can rise up to that level.
And as part of that comes into a key piece of performance. And so if you've got anybody who's not performing, I'm going to guarantee you that their issue falls into one of these 4 categories right here. So no matter what performance issue you're having with someone working from home, it's going to fall into one of these 4 categories. They either are lacking the direction and understanding of I don't know what to do. They're lacking the competency on how to do it. So the education, the training, they don't know how to do it. They're lacking the motivation to do it. That they don't want to do it. And so whatever the motivation is, there is no motivation to do it. And it could be that, hey, I don't have time to do this because I can't do this project, because if I don't get this project done, I'm going to miss this deadline. So I don't have the motivation to do this other project because of this other priority. Or I've been told that this priority is higher than this priority for somebody else. So they're lacking that motivation. And then the last thing is they don't have the accountability or the ownership of it. All right. So if you've got a performance issue, it's going to fall into one of these 4 buckets. And it could be sometimes you need to sit down with them and say, okay, where in here are we missing? Because this is, as a leader, as a fellow coworker, I need to understand so that I can either give you that direction, give you that competency, train you the competency, help with motivation, or give you accountability and ownership to be able to do it.
Once again, this is a absolutely crucial skill. In any management situation, this is what we should be doing. But when it comes to virtual, it's vital. And so this is another thing that you have to make sure that you're implementing and executing in a virtual environment. And hopefully that's a new habit that you pull in and bring into your in-person management skills going forward.
So working from home, we've got to invent a new routine. I mentioned earlier, one of our teammates, his routine was driving in, listening to his podcast, and that was how he got into the mindset of work. And for a lot of us, our commute to work was how we got in that mindset of work. So we need to create a new routine to get into the mindset of work, okay? That may mean that I get coffee and I'm gonna go walk around the block before I work. There needs to be some sort of transition, some sort of mental transition of I'm at home and I'm at work to I'm at home and I'm at work, right? Like that, there's gotta be this transition. It's just not I'm at home, but I'm now at work. And so whatever routine, if that's making your coffee, it's walking the dog. There was one guy, I remember in one of my trainings a long time ago, who said, Brandon, I've got it down. I get dressed for work and I walk out the front door and I go and I get a cup of coffee from Starbucks. And I turn around, I come back, I park my car, I walk in the back door and walk up to my home office and shut the door. And that's my transition, that mental transition of, okay, I've now gone to work. All right. Then also you've got to start setting some time to start and stop working, because it's so easy to just pick it up. Because now your computer is going to be, for me, my computer's right here constantly. I've got 2 big monitors next to me, and it's a constant reminder of anytime I walk downstairs, like, ooh, I could just send one more email. Ooh, I could check on and see if there's anything I missed on Slack. And so it's calling to me, and we've got to set some limits. Otherwise our brains are going to go crazy. So just set some time for that limit. Then workspace does not equal life space, is not greater than life space. So really, if you can, as much as you can, dedicate a space to the workspace. So I know there's a lot of people working from kitchen tables right now, which I totally understand. Try to avoid working from the couch. Please don't work from your bed. It's really, 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 really bad for your back, working from your bed. You're going to have major back issues if you're doing that. If you can, to the best of your ability, get a table and a chair. Or I have a desk propped up on some books, so I've got a standing desk, and it's just a separate little space because you've got to get it out of your normal space. Diet, exercise, and brain breaks, and get outside and get some breath. your eyes are not meant to stare at a computer screen all day long. And even those of us who work in an office all day, we're still not staring at a computer screen all day. We get up, we walk around, we look around. And a lot of times I find when people are working at home, they don't give themselves as many breaks because like it's just much more intense. I'm working on it, it's always there. So it's okay to take the time and give yourself a break. And as a part of that break, set some expectations with your teammates of, hey, I need a break. I need to go take care of my daughter or my son. I need to walk the dogs. Like, and just set that expectation, that I'm going to be out or I'm going to be unavailable. And times are going to shift. So one of the things I love about work from home and flexible work time is that some people are more morning people and some people are more night owl people. This is a great opportunity for the people who are more productive at night. Let them be that night owl. They're not going to have the interactions with their kids. They're not going to have a lot of the other distractions are happening on. If they want to be a night owl, let them be a night owl. And then maybe they start their day a little bit later. And then you try and book meetings more for the afternoon. If they're a morning person, they prefer to get up early in the morning, let them get up and work and just dial in and start working early. Book your meetings for the mid-morning. And this way you're allowing people to optimize when they're most productive, and then they can schedule their break and refresh time. If we let people work when they're most productive, we get more work out of people at a higher level, and all of us feel happier and healthier when we're working our optimal time. All right. So just try to work with people and help them understand what is their optimal time for work. The last one we're going to hit here. Oh, good.
So Brandon, the key on routines here is, if you think about professional athletes, you think about a NBA player, when they were playing, all of them have pre-shot routines. Golfers, pre-putting routines. All of these professional athletes know the importance of routines because it gets your mind in the right state to execute on what you need to have done. So it's, once again, very important as leaders to be communicating to your team that they need to redevelop these new routines. They have to reinvent the way that they get prepared for work. Otherwise, they're going to spend the first couple hours of the day just trying to get into that mode, just trying to figure out how to kind of get into that work mode. And what's also important on these brain breaks, they're going to feel this level of pressure and this level of guilt to continue to perform. They're going to continue to grind. I know if your team's anything like ours, I've actually started a couple times a day. Hey, if you haven't gotten up from your desk in a while, get up, go take a walk. If you haven't gotten outside yet, go outside. Don't eat lunch at your desk. Take a second to step away, let your brain refresh, and keep it moving. This is a marathon. We're in a sprint, but there's a long time to go in this race, and we've got to make sure that we keep our employees healthy. We've got to make sure that we're keeping them in a way that they're going to be able to optimize their performance over the long haul, not just over this short period of time.
So for those of you who are managers, this is going to be really key. We've always heard about praise in public and criticize in private, right? So in a remote setting, in a virtual working setting, in a telecommuting setting, telework setting, whatever term you want to use, a lot of the praise happens one-on-one. And what we need to do is maintain that public praise. So that means copying the world on, hey, great job by so-and-so. Posting on Slack to a general channel or a Microsoft Teams to your whole group channel of, hey, so-and-so, Derek, I was really impressed when you did X, Y, Z, right? We still need to get that public praise because people are still fueled off of knowing they're doing a good job. And then if there is anything from a constructive criticism standpoint, that then needs to be done in a one-on-one video or just a simple one-on-one call. Then you're going to have to proactively reach out and connect with your extroverts and your introverts. I should say introverts. That's a misspelling on our end. So proactively reach out and connect them. You're going to have some people who are going to not naturally pick up the phone or schedule a Zoom call, right? They're going to wait until you reach out to them. So remember, you've got some introverts on your team, not extroverts like what's written there, and reach out to them.
Brandon, that is actually,
did I read it wrong?
That is actually it's supposed to be extroverts, because what your extroverts are used to getting their energy from people. When they're around others, they're drawing that energy from them. Right now, they're feeling isolated. They're feeling cooped up. They're getting quarantine crazy. And so what's important is to proactively reach out and connect with these extroverts and try to re-energize them. Introverts are going to have a little bit of an easier time with the isolation because they're used to getting energy from their own well. These extroverts, they're going to have a hard time if this extends out for a longer period of time. So it's vitally important that you're connecting them. Once again, it's got to be video with these extroverts. It's got to be something that's this personal connection that they can feed off of it. This is also where it's really important that, scheduling virtual happy hours and other things like that, to where you're getting these interactions for these extroverts who are used to getting their energy from other people. You've got to be much more creative. You've got to be much more intentional about creating those instances and circumstances.
So as we start to wrap through the rest of the slide, if you've got any questions, go ahead and hit the questions, the Q&A tab on your on the Zoom call, and we'll get to some of those questions here right at the last 10 minutes, because I know we've got about 9 minutes where we've got to go. So next is working remotely needs to focus on the quality of work output versus time taken. So I can't tell you how many people judge someone's work off of how long are they sitting in a seat, right? Regardless of whether they're playing solitaire or not. So now when we're working remotely, we need to judge off the quality of the output versus the time it took to get it, and or the accessibility of when someone's on. So if someone's cranking and does great work between midnight and 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., whatever, okay, great. As long as the quality of work is there, that's what we've got to focus on praising and looking for. Next is going to be actively listening. So this is where that seek to understand before you're understood, right? Like we need to take time to understand what someone's saying and where they're really coming from before we try to we should be pushing our point, trying to make our point with them. We talked about the group accountability and the importance of getting more and more people to make accountability and make commitments to a group versus one-on-one. And then as a manager, I would encourage you to be seeking feedback and closing that loop as quickly as you can. So what are you struggling with? What are you having issues with? And trying to get that feedback, and then coming back to people and closing that loop and say, okay, here's what we're doing for it. Here's what we're working on, and try and get that loop closed. And then lastly, get people to submit weekly digests. So if you're trying to manage people and this is new and you don't know what's happening, and you're used to being able to walk up to people and say, hey, what's going on? How are you working? Have people submit to their manager a weekly digest of the things that they got done, anything they were stuck on, and not a micromanage of how many hours did you do this and how many minutes of this, but hey, at a high level, here are some of the projects, here are some of the things that I advanced and got through, but here's some of the places that I got stuck. So let's take we've got a couple additional resources that we're going to show you, as well as some upcoming webinars. I'm checking the Q&A. There was one there, but it looks like it got pulled. So we'll show you some of the additional resources that we have right now. And that is, if you go to this Conflux Colearning and you go to this URL of confluxcolearning.org/COVID-19-resources, first of all, you're going to see Building Your Crisis Communication Plan. This is the webinar that we ran yesterday. We've got the video link up here for those of you who would like to watch it. It was a fun, rated well webinar based off the text messages I got afterward and emails. And then, as well as a crisis communication plan, we created some different templates for you to pick up and download and roll with. We're going to be posting this webinar here, as well as any other additional resources we can find around remote work best practice. You can come to one place and be able to download it. And then next week, if you're free on Monday and on Wednesday, we're going to have remote selling from field to virtual sales. That's going to be more of a panel discussion. We're pulling together some different experts who are fantastic at selling only remotely. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about how do you find opportunity in adversity? Because adversity creates opportunity. We just need to look for it, and we need to find it. Derek, anything you want to say before we sign off here?
Yeah, so I just think this is an amazing opportunity for all of us to really work on our leadership skills, work on our management skills, work on our communication skills. These are things that are important and nice to do most of the time. Right now, it's vitally important, it's super urgent, and we have to. So I would just recommend all of you pick one skill, try to get a little bit better at it today, pick another one, try to get a little bit better at it tomorrow. But there's a lot of tips and tricks in here that you can't do all at once, but try to incorporate these into your daily mix in your tool bag. And each day you're going to get a little bit better. And then once again, on the other side of this, and there will be another side, this too shall pass. We're going to be much better leaders. We're going to be much better communicators. We're going to be much better managers, and our businesses are all going to be better for it. So just keep fighting the good fight. This is an important time for us to all just keep calm, keep cool, keep collected, and lead our teams, lead our people, lead our family, and be the people that others can look to in a time of crisis, be that pillar of strength. Thank you again for joining us today. Looking forward to any of you joining us on Monday. Feel free to ask any questions and send any messages, and we'll try to continue to update as we go. But thanks again for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Take care.